Hi. I'm sorry, I just unmuted you. I didn't hear what you were saying.
Dr. Porcelli said he might need some assistance.
Okay.
Coming over, so you might need to resend a link to him. Okay, Shoemaker's here and I've got something to do. I still can't believe I couldn't find the name of the scholarship recipients for Shoemaker. Deb, thank you so much. Charlene, Russ. Okay, Scott, can you let people in? I've got to pull up the PowerPoint.
I have been.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Well,
Day by day. Let's see. Open with Google Slides and present. Okay.
now you're unmuted. So.
All right. I can go down. I'm looking for, there we are, Zoom. Okay, I'll keep that there and move that there. Do we have everybody in?
I don't see Dr. Porcelli yet.
Who are you looking for?
Okay, there I am. I'll call the meeting to order and I'll take a roll call.
That sounds like a plan. I say go for it.
Okay. I would like to call the May meeting of OHM BOCES to order, please. And I would like to take a roll call. Mr. Boucher,
Oh, make sure you're not muted, please.
Here.
okay. Mrs. Anderson,
Here.
Mrs. Corbin,
Here.
Mrs. Irvin,
Here.
Mr. Griffin,
Here.
Mrs. Hartman,
Charlene. Charlene's my buddy.
maybe she's muted. Mr. Moore,
There's Ross.
there she is. She's not on.
Elaine, are you continuing with the roll?
Yes, I see Charlene, but she didn't answer, so she's there. Okay,
Yep.
Mr. Moore.
I don't see Mike here, so I think Scott Morris is probably calling him to try to bring him in, is my guess.
Okay, Mr. Nelson.
He's here. Yep.
Okay, Dr. Porcelli.
He is not here.
And Mr. Stewart.
Here.
Okay, so we need Porcelli and Mr. Moore. Is that working on that?
Yep, Scott's working on it. And I'll open up a chat and see, we probably have something in here. All right. Okay, so I think Scott's going to try to bring in Mike Moore and Dr. Porcelli. You do have a quorum present if you want to continue.
Okay, we will together say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States
United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'd like to announce that this meeting is being recorded and is available to anyone who would like a recording by contacting our technical department. And for communication, I'd just like the moment to reflect on the fact that Helen Salerno has passed away. Many of us know Helen and have been with her at many conferences over the year, and we are very supportive of John and all that he's done and of the courage and strength that they show. So if we could just take a moment to think about Helen and John and hope that they are both at peace. Okay, do we have any other correspondence? If not, we'll move to the district superintendent's report.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. We set the report up in a PowerPoint so we can just kind of sequence from one topic to another. That will include myself, Mr. Cowan, and Ann Turner. And of course, we'll have some chiming in from other members of the senior council. During this time, I would ask that you all be muted so that there's not background noise. We can minimize that. And of course, we'll have time for discussion and dialogue where I'll ask people to unmute if there's any particular questions you might have. And I'll do that after the different sequences of the report because there are multiple topics. So let me do that right now. Okay, so hopefully you can all see this and hopefully it's going to work. So, okay. So there will be the following. I'm going to talk about the comptroller's audit. We were able to meet with them. Capital project update, closure and reentry planning, annual audit, and COVID-19. That's just a little bit of information that Charlie Cowan will share with you. The BOCES budget, which we've gone through with the past, but is up for approval, and we wanted to talk a little bit about with you tonight. Staff recognition planning, student ceremonies, and what's been happening where there's a little initiative, a big initiative actually, going underway right now with our PPD department and our instructional support services. So the comptrollers were able to come into our district this year and they decided to audit technology. And they've had occasional meetings with us, for example, to talk about what their audit objectives are. And they had a meeting with myself, Mr. Cowan, and Mr. Morris to review the initial findings of their audit. But what they haven't done yet is created their official draft document. So once we receive that, then we have to respond, and there'll be another meeting that they'll have most likely with the board officers. But since we do have some initial response coming in from the comptroller's office, I wanted to share that with you now. So there was two objectives of this audit, which we have talked about before, and they're listed in the slide for you, which is where they were trying to determine whether or not we had implemented adequate IT access controls over our network and financial system to safeguard information. And then also to determine whether or not we've provided security awareness training and whether or not our assets were accessed for appropriate purposes. Now, as a result of the audit in technology, the comptroller divides the findings into two areas. Public findings, those are findings they can share publicly. And of course, the comptrollers are transparent in their work. That is their obligation. And it certainly is the obligation of this board to the best extent possible. However, the comptroller's office is aware, as are we, that there are certain parts of information and technology that must remain confidential in order to maintain the security of the network and the security of employee and student information. So what will happen is that some information will arrive in a public document, a public draft. Will provide a public response. It will be shared publicly in a meeting like this. And then that response will be sent back to the commissioner's office, comptroller's office, and be publicized. but there will be findings of their report that are confidential, and hence I'm not sharing those in this public session. They have to be shared to me in an encrypted format. And yes, our organization does have to respond and fix any of those findings. However, we're not able to share them publicly, and neither does the comptroller's office. So in either case, we do respond to any findings of a comptroller, just with any other audit with the response to improve or to address. So the preliminary findings are as follows. One of the things they did was looked at our board policy 5306, which has to do with use of our computers and IT assets regarding personal use. And what they found is on a random audit of users on computers that something like 9 out of 10 users do use their computers for personal reasons, things like banking, paying a bill, shopping, could be social media use. They initially said that our policy 5306 prohibited personal use. So we dialogued with them about that because we do recognize that technology is now integrated into everyone's lives. So it's not unusual for personal use to be there. However, that use should be appropriate, not only in the type of use and in the frequency of use, and of course, in regards to work time and network security. They agreed and recommend that we move forward with trying to pursue a hybrid policy that incorporates personal use and is specific in those terms to create a better security posture for the organization. So we did reach out to our attorneys regarding policy 5306, and they were surprised the comptroller felt that it was a restrictive policy. Well, actually a very secure policy in terms of saying no personal use, because in fact, policy 5306 does allow for personal use, and our attorneys pointed that out to us. So I will be following back up with the comptrollers just to make sure that we have the same understanding of policy 5306. However, the focus of the conversation really came down to bullet number 2 on your slide, which is making sure that we have the appropriate awareness and security trainings in place for all employees, and that that be done with specific frequency, which is not the case now. So we do offer professional development in computer security, and everyone received a training earlier this year, but there has been no established schedule of frequency in place yet, or a way to ensure that all employees receive this, and maybe more than one training per year. So of course, I'll be in the next slide talking about how we'll address that, but that would balance off that personal use in addition to maintaining a secure network, or helping to maintain a secure network. They recommend that web filtration should be set to a higher sensitivity threshold, and that we need to improve upon our user account management. They were able to find some old accounts of people who once had accounts with us, former employees, that where their account had not been dropped. The employees weren't necessarily tapping into the account or using them, but they were still on rosters. They talked about PPSI. That's a term that you might be familiar with. It's part of Education Law 2D, and Scott Morris did a presentation about this to all of us in, I think, our February board meeting. So PPSI is personal, private, or sensitive information of students and staff. And what they talked about with management of that is that the standard should be that we can identify all of the different types of data that our system uses that might contain PPSI, and then classify it as such and put it under the auspices of a chief data officer to make sure that there are security measures in place for not only proper security, but proper access to such information. And our chief data officer is Scott Morris, and he is currently working on that. So these are responses that we're currently working on. So we're instituting specific and frequent professional development for all of our employees. For example, using our Know Before training, which is internet-based training. You log on, it's 20 minutes or 30 minutes of training in different aspects of appropriate use and network security. We have GoGuardian, which is a web filtration product. So it certainly can be set to a threshold to ensure, as it currently does, that people aren't using inappropriate sites, right? So children are not accessing inappropriate things, but it also can monitor student and staff use of technology, specifically internet access and use of the internet. So we're going to institute that, and that will become wrapped into the professional development that we're applying not only for our children, but for our staff about appropriate use. We have put a new procedure in place for user account review that ties into, for example, board appointments. So as new personnel are approved by the Board of Ed, that would then kind of go to another department who reviews that and goes back into user accounts. And the same thing for people who are resigning or retiring from us, so we can turn on and shut off user accounts accordingly. And Mr. Morris right now is going through a review and classification process of our data to determine what data contains PPSI. So before we go on to the window project, what I'm going to do is stop sharing my screen for a moment so I can see everybody. And I'm going to ask if there are any particular questions about that before we move on to the next section of the district superintendent's report. So if you have a question, just unmute and ask. Oh, Mr. Griffin has a question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, John.
As far as the personal use of the BOCES computer, and you mentioned banking, personal banking. And I've been out of the workplace for a while, but I don't remember using our personal computer, our business computer for personal banking. But is that now relatively common?
Well, I think without understanding whether or not the question would have to do with, like, is it a case of where you're going and you're clicking and paying a bill real quick, or is it accessing your NBT bank account, right, to transfer things? I think it's certainly more convenient. Many people have apps on their phones, or it automatically does it, or you're going to a website. It's not so much downloading specific software to computers, where back in the day that might have been the case. It's more internet access. People are just hopping on to whatever web page to do something and then back off. That's probably the best way I can answer that question.
Dr. Kilburn?
Hang on just one moment. Okay, so I'm gonna go over to Dr. Porcelli.
Yeah, two questions for you. The first one, it would seem that if someone is using our computer, the district's computer, for personal information, banking, whatever, as my good friend John just pointed out, that should a situation arise where things become foilable, people should, that would be, you could take the computer and foil whatever is on it, which might include my banking. Is that correct?
Yes. So when we educate people about the use of technology, that's something that you always want to make sure you bring into the conversation. Just like with email or anything along those lines, you have to make sure there's awareness that what you do on the internet under the auspices of your BOCES identification is subject to public inspection, right? So yes. One of the things that we have to learn as employees and teach to each other and to our students is what you do under a domain. For example, when I log into this computer, or when I'm home, I'll give you this example because this might freak you out. I could be home using my Chromebook that I paid for with my own money, using my Spectrum internet that I pay for, the access, and I could go on to the internet, but on my internet account, my Chrome account, I am logged in under my pkilburn@boces.org email. Everything I do under that domain belongs to BOCES and is publicly accessible, even though I'm on a physical device I paid for, an internet access I'm paying for, I'm in my residence and not during my work time. That's why it's really important that we provide appropriate professional development. As we might know now, we're all living it right in this moment. Technology has become an integrated tool. It's integrated in your everyday, it's integrated in your personal and work life. You take your tools with you, and it's not so much anymore about the device, right? So whether I'm using my my personal cell phone, or my work cell phone, or my work laptop, or my desktop, or my personal Chromebook, none of it really matters. These are just portals that get us to websites where we transact information for work and personal reasons. And we have to understand under what auspices we're accessing those websites and using information. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am. Second question, I assume at some point in time, you'll be running some of this through the policy committee?
Well, actually, if there's no recommended changes to 5306, we would not bring that to the policy committee because our attorneys don't recommend we change it. They felt that the comptroller's office may have misinterpreted the policy. The policy does allow for personal use. We would beef up procedure regarding professional development and training, and also procedure regarding use and monitoring.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So I'm not seeing any other questions, so I'm going to go back into the shared screen. Hang on to your hats. Off we go. And we're into the Windows project. So I'm going to ask Mr. Cowan to please chime in.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kilburn. Just very quickly to remind the board of where we are at with the capital project. And about a year ago, in March of 2019, the board did authorize the window project. They authorized it to an amount of $1,276,000. It was approved by SED in May. We received bids and awarded the bid to Utica Glass in July of 2019. Their bid was for $417,000. And then the winter came along. We didn't get the work done last summer, and we didn't expect that we would. We didn't want to start and then have to stop when the weather turned bad. So we held off until this spring. At this point in time, with the rules relating to the closing New York State, we suspending New York State, we can start that construction at this point in time. So we had a meeting on the 7th. The contractor told us that they would be here this week to mobilize. They've got much of their materials located down at the Conservation Learning Center. They will move that up to the parking lot here closer to the main campus. And next Monday, they intend to start installing and doing the window installation. They'll start at Dr. Kilburn's corner and will run through to the end of the CTE section of the front of the building, installing windows on the 3 levels. Utica Glass has indicated they expect that they will be done by June 30th at this point in time. In that meeting last week, we talked about what are some of the safeguards that they will put in place to make sure that we are still in compliance with the New York pause. That's the word I was looking for, pause, while they are here on campus. And Gary Pulio did indicate that they will follow all of the rules as far as social distancing. They will wear gloves and face masks while they are on the job site. All work will be able to be completed from the exterior of the building. We weren't sure about that. We discussed how they would caulk. They will put the caulk on before they set the window glass sections in. So they'll set that in. They will not have to come into the building at all. If they do, they will work with Bob Harris to make sure that we are aware when they are in the building, but there's no expectation that they will be in the building for work. They may come in for a meeting with the architect and myself and others. Restrooms, they would use those that are at the Conservation Learning Center, and any facilities that they do use, in particular those restrooms, we would have our cleaning crew disinfect them nightly as a requirement of the New York State pause. So right now it looks pretty good that the project will be started and finished before the end of this fiscal year, June 30th. And if there are any questions at this time, we would entertain them.
Charlie?
Yes.
Yeah. We got approval for $1.2 million. This is 417. Is this a phase of it, or what do we do with the rest of the money?
No, this is the whole thing.
So now what can we do with the rest of the money?
Well, generally give it back to the school districts, and we transferred over $676,000 last year before June 30th, with the intention of transferring the additional $600,000 over in this school year, 2019-20. That has not taken place at this point in time. That money still sits in the O&M budget. So, and
the districts approve our O&M budget, correct?
Well, that's built into the services. That's then a transfer. Okay. Their cost is into the services.
They paid the $1.2 million.
Correct.
Okay. And the job came in at 417.
Yep.
And we've been keeping their money.
At this time, the 600,000 from this year we're holding on to, and it's a decision we will make. I don't believe, my recommendation would be that we don't transfer any more over into a capital project that doesn't exist at this
Well,
time.
That's what I'm trying to say. We've got this bank there and it belongs to the districts.
Agreed,
So,
yes.
That's what we need to do with it.
I will tell you that in our budget discussion, Charlie's going to talk about strategies we're taking to start to harness existing expenses and look at refunds and allowing opportunities for districts to be able to access funding within a given year and then within the following year. And Elaine, that would be part of that decision making.
Yeah, because it's important that, I'm a little bit concerned in that we had a budget of 1.2 and spent 417.
Right.
But it bothers me from the people that make the budget and make recommendations. On the other hand, I know it's a place for districts to put money for a while, but it's their money and things are tight. So, okay, as long as you're going to address that.
Yep. Okay, any other questions about the window project? I will say that I did have an opportunity to speak with Mr. Salerno earlier this week. And at the close of this conversation, we were going to establish a facilities committee meeting. I'm not comfortable doing so with the chair not being present here with us. So I will be following up with Mr. Salerno, probably not until after next week, so one more full week before I do. And then I'll ask Deb to send out some dates that might work. So if you're a member of I apologize, I call it facilities committee, the capital project committee. If you're a member of that, please look for some dates, probably within 2 weeks, to potential dates to meet. All right, I'm going to move to the next section. So I'll share again. And we are on to, Charlie, you were going to talk about the auditors, the annual audit and remote approach during COVID-19. Do you want to just do that quick?
Sure thing. So typically we do have a meeting of the audit committee at this time of year with our external auditors to review the procedures and what areas they will focus on. Obviously, they are not coming out for an in-person meeting. What they are doing is changing their direction or their format of their audit. And they sent us a questionnaire, about a 15-page questionnaire asking for responses to many areas of internal controls for the BOCES. We finished that and sent that to them on Monday. They're going to review that and would like to schedule a meeting in the month of probably June with the audit committee to discuss the focus of their audit. So again, that would be another area that we'll look to the committee to schedule a meeting in the month of June.
Okay,
Okay,
so
any
I'd just
questions
like
about
to
that?
clarify, Charlie, that we will be having a meeting prior to their beginning the audit, because that's something you have to do.
Exactly,
Legal.
yes, yes.
Okay. Okay, so they're just doing some field work now so that they'll be prepared to have a discussion with us.
Yes.
So Charlie, in terms of trying to set up that meeting in June, are you waiting to hear back from them first, or are you asking that this group and those on the committee pull out their calendars now?
I guess I'd like to reach out to them and see how long it's going to be before they can or would like to meet, and then probably get back to the committee by the end of May for a meeting in the month of June.
So audit committee, sharpen your pencils and await message from Charlie. Okay, back to the shared screen. Okay, so COVID reentry. So many of you should know by now, I'm sure you do, that the governor closed school for the remainder of the academic year. And summer school decisions have yet to be made. So we're still awaiting announcements regarding that. And all of us across the state, certainly in terms of school, have got to figure out what reentry could look like. And for BOCES, that also is not just talking about instructional programs, but the entire organization. And there are many different things we have to think about. So we're trying to build plans that are flexible and tiered, look at instructional supports, but also instructional programs and the infrastructure. And I mean by that, like our facilities, our technology, kind of like the underlying groundwork of an organization. So I'll explain what I mean by tiered. We are developing plans that address 4 levels of response. I didn't have a chance to revise the wording in my slide, but our current circumstances would be the most restrictive. So building from what we currently have, where the buildings are shut down for children and we're using remote instruction. And then we're building up from there to red, yellow, and green levels, with red being the next most restrictive, then yellow, then green, and kind of stacking it according to a red environment would be people can return, but it's at thresholds of 25% capacity with social distancing and PPE. And what does that mean for the organization? Then what does it mean if we can be at 50% capacity? What does it mean when we can start to be in common rooms and common spaces? So we're also not only just planning in those levels, but we're doing hybrid plans. So we have to consider what reentry might look like in a fluid model. So I'll give you an example. Imagine that it's May, and by May, our kids are back to physically, and they're physically in school. Social distancing is mitigated to some degree in the classroom. They may or may not have to mask in certain locations, but there is an entire classroom full of students or an entire section of a building that's had a spike in COVID. And so now we might have some children who are having to be home remotely, or teachers who might have to be home remotely, or entire sections of buildings that have to be closed and sanitized and not accessible. So while we're also planning according to levels, we have to look at how we can make a kind of a fluid hybrid model that can mix in different levels with the situations and parameters that we're going to be under at any one time. So our planning is organizational wide. So we've actually been planning across divisions. So we're thinking of all parties, like how will this affect students and faculty? What about how we communicate? What about our facilities or IT, our clerical people? So we're trying to think of all the different people in the organization. And we're also using cross-role planning. So we're actually having our divisions look at each other's plans to try to gain a different perspective on similar issues. So hopefully we don't miss anything. We're sharing resources with the component districts, certainly among DSs across the state. And our safety services from BOCES are joining up with BOCES of New York with different safety groups to try to build some common resources and common planning tools for components and for BOCES. And we've most recently been responding not only to the governor's decisions, but the Oneida County Executive has just put out guidance documents and resources regarding the lifting of New York pause locally and what that means for organizations and businesses. So that's been starting to give us some local health guidance. This kind of planning is very complex, and it is tricky because what we don't have in place is firm public health policy that's fixed. And it probably won't be fixed for a while, because certainly we could have another round of the virus continuing to come back and change our current circumstances. So we'll have to be responsive in all that we do. So before we go into budget, I'm going to stop sharing and ask if there are any questions right now. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody, so I'm going to go back in.
Oh,
Can anybody hear me now?
Gary Nelson, it's very hard to hear you. I think your internet connection's gapping out. You might try chatting in the chat box at the bottom of your screen so we can see a comment you might like to make. So let me see if I can initiate Gary.
Okay.
Here we are. Okay, and we have someone who, oh, Gary Nelson, I think is going, yep. We're just gonna wait another minute. I think Gary has a question for us.
I have a quick question while Gary's
For Michelle.
again. When you say we, what does that mean, we? Like, who are we? Who are we?
Depends on the we are, right? So we, the senior council, have been meeting just about twice weekly for the past 2 weeks to go over plans. But then we, the senior council meetings, are meeting with their program leaders, department leaders, principals, things like that to develop plans. And those we's are dealing with their employees and underneath them to start to bring plans up. I'm part of a we that's working with other DSs to come to understand this process better. And I just had some recent conversations with component school superintendents about that today. And tomorrow, I'm going to be meeting with all the superintendents in the region. And this is one of many different topics that we're going to be covering together.
Okay, and then I also sent out an email a few days ago about
The state.
yeah, just, I sort of felt like we got snubbed, we as in the BOCES, on his list of people that we're going to reimagine. Did you get that email? Did everyone get that email?
Yeah.
Just kind of your thoughts as to what happened there, or if that's even a conversation in your circle of DSs.
So when the governor first announced that task force, you might recall that there were no educators on it at all.
Right.
And then what happened in response to that was that the chancellor of the Board of Regents and the interim commissioner Tahoe put out an announcement, press release, that they'd be forming a state ed task force, which I think then triggered a response from the other side. So in terms of DSs not being on that committee, our best representation would be through interim commissioner Tahoe, who, being on that committee and having regular communication with DSs, will work that way. As to the committee's decision-making to choose how they choose, I don't know, but I would say they did get representation. Like they had higher ed, I think there might be a charter, there are some privates, there's big city schools and the commissioner. So as DSs, there's a group of DSs who meet with the commissioner regularly, like bi-weekly, and then we meet monthly with the commissioner. So we're able to elicit concerns through her, and she has a pretty good understanding of the public schools from that perspective to share on that committee.
Okay, all right, good. As long as you feel that we're having a seat, even if there's no one in that seat, right? At the table.
Yeah. Gary Nelson asked a great question. How are we handling students without internet connection? So that depends on a few things, Gary. We work with our component school districts. So typically students who are with us half day are getting their device technology from their home district and using that. Mr. Morris, we do provide device technology for students, and have we provided the MiFi hotspots for kids if they've needed them?
Yeah, so we've got probably close to 200 of them out there now. I think in Howland Patton specifically, there's close to 60 that have been delivered to kids at this point.
Gary, could you hear that? Gary Nelson? Okay, so I'm going to move back into the screen share to talk to you about the budget. So as we talked about before, the budget has been reviewed with this board. You've had a presentation about it. And yet we know that the circumstances of all of us have changed, as we've talked about, with funding for schools. So we're kind of working in cooperation with our school superintendents, responding to their commitments, but like them, we're in a position of having to try to use a crystal ball and project into a year where we don't know where funding is going to land. As you recall, the governor had said that that the schools are getting a certain amount of state aid. They're getting federal relief that's kind of like running through the state, and some of it could be taken back. So it's like, imagine this, I'm going to use my hands. This is a pot of money that's coming to a school district from the state. And the governor said, here's your pot, but there's different times during the year where I might take some out of the pot. Okay, so we know that. Put that over here. So that's a superintendent. They have to think about that pot. They also know that the federal government is coming up with stimulus. And it's possible that some of that stimulus might get directed straight to schools. It's more probable that that stimulus is going to go to the governor. Now, what happens then? The governor may add it to the pot, or he may say, I'll take some out, but put this back in so the pile kind of stays the same. Or he might take out of the pile and not put so much back in. So all of our components are in this situation where they're building budgets for a school year, and in the midst of the school year, they may have to keep revising their budgets. And we may also find ourselves in that similar situation. So I've asked Charlie to run through a few things with you regarding our commitments, the circumstances by how we're budgeting, and what possible steps we might be taking mid-year to help the districts, and what we definitely have to do for next year. If you also recall, I said this year is the year we're kind of have to navigate through, but the next year, 2020, 2021, that's going to be a difficult year, because unless the federal government is prepared to like rain down the change, which, you know, I'm always kind of leery of, that's the year that there's going to be a big gap. And accordingly, I think that's the year we'll see big changes in terms of how we do things and how our districts do things. So Charlie, I'm going to share the screen, and he's going to talk you through something. I might chime in, and we'll be open for some questions. Okay, let me get to the thing here. Okay, go ahead, Charlie.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kilburn. I think you pretty much gave my whole presentation. So
Hey, that was easy.
Yeah. As Dr. Kilburn said, back in February, the board did approve a preliminary budget, and that amount is the same that we are asking you to approve tonight. So with all of the changes and the lot that has gone on in the country, in the state, at the school district level, as Dr. Kilburn said, we wanted to give you some explanations of, you know, what makes up in that $72 million and what our plans are in the 2021 school year to help school districts should things occur that they continue to have aid takebacks from the state. So these numbers are, this is a slide that was actually in the February board meeting. That amount of $72 million was the proposed amount that you approved at that time. You can see the majority of that represented by services that are provided by the BOCES. The other thing that I'll point out is the administrative budget was approved by all boards at their April 28th meeting that they held. So I guess we'll go from there, Dr. Kilburn.
Sure.
So at the time that we reviewed the numbers in February, what we stressed was that we look at the unit cost and we try to keep them under control. And then where we really saw the growth in school districts in that budgeted number was the utilization of the various programs. And some of these are just estimates based upon historical usage, and others are based upon the student counts that were in programs during the 2019-20 school year that we're in right now when the budgets were being formulated. So I'll point out the very first item, learning technologies, equipment, and software. Typically, we have not budgeted much in that line, and school districts would put into their commitment form how much they expected they would buy from us in equipment from Scott Morris and that division. They would buy basically any kind of technology. Scott, as he was building his budgets this year, took a look at history and said and realized that we can start to put some of those monies into the budget. So you can see $1.5 million that was plugged into the budget for 2021, where there was almost nothing in the past. The next line item, in addition to our programs, the programs that are through cross contracts with other BOCES are part of our budget. So what we do there again is we just take a look at a snapshot of how much have districts committed to at the time that we are finalizing our budget. And we finalize our budget right around January 1st. At that point in time, we take the numbers that are committed to for these various cross contracts, and we use them for the budgeted numbers. Now, all of these are just budgeted numbers. Remember that districts can subscribe to a greater amount, a lesser amount, or exactly what is put on there as their estimate. And so at the end of December, when we looked at what was received from Madison BOCES and computer services, is about $6.3 million, up from $5 million at the beginning of last year's budget. So there's another 1.3 million. Again, nothing that we have to do anything to do with the cross contract pieces. A couple of the other ones, if you look at the 1213, the 611, the 812, those various ones down the line, again, the increases are fairly significant in the budgeted amounts. And I'll look at the 1213 line number. You can see that the tuition is being proposed to increase that 3.7%. But when you look at the overall increase to the budget in that program, it's up about 31.5%, or $1.1 million. And that's because of the number of kids that are participating in the program at the point in time when this budget was finalized for 2021 in comparison to basically a year ago, the number of kids. And if you look down through a number of the special education programs, a number of the other programs that are part of ours, it's really the utilization that's causing the budget to increase much more than the rates that we're charging to the programs. So if there are any questions on that, be willing to take them, or maybe we'll just keep moving through.
I would recommend that we move through it because then I can drop the shared screen and we can see if people have questions.
Very good. Okay. So starting to think about what we're going to do in the 2021 school year for the school districts, the first thing is the commitment forms that we've started to get back, and we've gotten back 10 of the 12 school districts at this point, and the other 2 have indicated to me it'll be in the next day or so. We really haven't seen much of a decline in their services that they have requested from us. And when you look at our budget, that really translates into the services that we are providing to school districts. And a large piece of those services are represented by the blue slice of this pie. About 64.5% are the salary and benefits of the employees of OHM BOCES. That any changes that we make there would be really a change in the service levels that are being provided to the school districts. The other 2 pieces that are really untouchable by us, the red and the green, the red being cross contracts. Again, those are amounts that services that school districts have committed to with other BOCES. So if they make a reduction in that commitment, that's their choice, and we really won't will have no impact on us. And then the green piece, the 5.75% is the largest piece of that is our DASNY payment. And then we also have rent payments for the Brodock site and classrooms that are utilized by the school districts for programs, or that we rent from the school districts for programs. So those are the pieces that are very difficult to impact without it affecting our programs. The purple slice of the pie is kind of that everything else, the supplies, the equipment, the contractual services, all of that stuff. And those are the pieces that we can focus on trying to keep cost as controlled as possible as we go into the 2021 fiscal year. So as we start to think about what will this mean for school districts, what is the reality that school districts are going to live in 2021? And as Dr. Kilburn referenced, the first thing is the governor has been given some authority, some power to kind of take a look at how the state is performing financially as the 2021 state fiscal year rolls out, and unilaterally basically determined that he's going to take additional money from school districts potentially. And he's got look back periods. The first one ended on April 30th. I believe that was it's through May 15th that a final decision will be made if he's going to do any take back from that first look back period. The next one is May and June of 2020. There's a third one that goes through December 31st, 2020. And I believe there may be a fourth one that goes right through the end of the state's fiscal year of March 31, 2021. So understanding that school districts have been told how much aid they're getting at this point in time, which includes some federal assistance, supplanting, not supplementing, but supplanting state aid, that there may be reductions in that based on the powers that have been given to the governor. The second piece of that is that federal assistance. We know this year, and as Dr. Kilburn explained, there was some additional financial aid, fiscal aid given to school districts from the federal government, from one of their CARES relief packages. And it was passed through the state. And as Dr. Kilburn explained, basically that money was just a reduction of state aid for school districts and then backfilled with those federal monies. So going forward, there may be additional federal assistance, but if there is, what will happen with that? Hopefully it is money that will be awarded to the school districts, or if it goes through the state, that the state does not take that as an opportunity to further reduce the state aid that they're promising to pay to school districts at this time. But if you recall, and many of you probably do, back in 2009-10, when the ERA stimulus packages came along. There was initial reductions in state aid that was backfilled with ERA money, and then there was a second take back in December, which was backfilled with additional federal money in 2009-10's fiscal year. So that's certainly a possibility. As we mentioned earlier, the commitments have really been stable. I mean, there have been a couple of itinerant positions that have been reduced here and there. There's been some looking at the special education programs, but as I said, overall, the 10 that I've looked at as of this morning are really, there's no significant reduction in the services that school districts are expecting from BOCES. And another piece of that is, I think some of the superintendents have indicated to Dr. Kilburn, BOCES may be the best place that we can go to continue to expect to receive revenues in the future, with at this point in time, the services that school districts subscribe to through BOCES generating that BOCES aid. With that, we look forward to the next fiscal year, and what will 21-22 look like? The first thing would be, if no additional federal assistance, the state budget will first have to be increased just to make up for that money that they've reduced it by in 2021 to get back to the same level for 21-22. So the expectation is, the term that was used in 9-10, 10-11 was that funding cliff. When the federal money went away, school districts then saw actually a decrease in their assistance from the state. So that's something that certainly we're aware of going into as we're starting to think about 21-22. And as Mrs. Falvo said, we will look at these things that we've kind of built into our budgets historically and understand that we don't need to put them aside for a rainy day for us. We need to make sure that they're available to give back to school districts to the extent possible. Another piece of that is that, as I said, some of the superintendents and school districts have looked at what they do with BOCES and recognize that it is an opportunity for them to continue to receive some money back in the form of their BOCES aid. At some point, the fear is that the governor will win that battle and be able to cap BOCES aid. And if that were to happen, by continuing to cut back things at this point in time when their aid can be generated, we may be just hurting the districts further by cutting and reducing things too significantly. So we have to keep that in mind, that one of the things that BOCES is that revenue generated for school districts, and we don't want to put the clamps on so tightly that it's a detriment to the school districts in their aid that they can currently generate with us. I think
so. In terms of, I want to make sure
I think you double jumped.
I double jumped. This is you, right, Charlie?
Yep, I'll take one more here. As I said, so with that as a framework for 2021, what we're looking at is certainly, we're going to try to reduce and monitor our expenses to the extent possible. Most easily in that purple slice of pie from the pie chart a few slides back. Again, and Mr. Hill pointed this out, one thing that BOCES is always looked towards is we will be the leader in understanding what's going to be needed in the world of education for our component school districts. So we need to stay on the leading edge of the newest practices, the best practices in the educational world, in safety, whatever the facet of services that we deliver are. So it isn't a matter of there will be no travel, there will be no conferences. It may be, instead of 4 of you going, we're going to send 2 of you this year, and we're going to share the information that you learn at those conferences. I think that's how we will more closely look at things. One thing that we did do, and that was part of our parameters that were approved back in October, was the health insurance increase rate of 6%, and that is built into the budget, and that has stayed in the budget at this point in time. And there have been some questions. Typically, that is something that we would give back as part of the refund a year later. So that would typically go back to the school districts in October of 2021. Looking at what we can do with that money perhaps a little bit sooner is I'll go down to the 4th bullet, which is to expedite the October 2020 refund calculation. So there's 2 things that we can think about. As these look back periods occur, and the next one being at the end of June. If the governor in July or early August declares that, we're going to reduce school district funding by another 3, 5, 7%, whatever the number is, we hope to be able to tell the districts by the end of August what their refund will be for 2020, and typically received in October 2020 and not known until very close to that date. So we're working on that process right now. And again, we're hoping to be able to quantify that number for the school district. So they've built some of that into their budgets, but if they are informed that they're having an additional take back from the state, and we tell them your refund will be $200,000. If they only budgeted $150,000, they can hopefully preserve some program for that $50,000 additional refund that may be available to them. And then below that, as 2021 begins and rolls forward, it gets underway, we would kind of look at perhaps giving them a credit in year. The refund has been between 3.5% and 4%, and that's not the protected money. That's money that this is money that we are able to reduce costs by from our budgeted numbers and return to them. So if we came up with a number that we would say, as 2021 unfolds and further lookbacks occur, we would want to be able to offer you an in-year credit so that, again, you could perhaps preserve some programs as that additional state aid may be taken back from school districts. And that will do it for me, Dr. Kilburn. Go ahead.
Okay. So in essence, what we're trying to do is figure out ways to flatten our expenses without creating an artificial cap on expense-driven aids, because that's going to hurt component schools. So if this is the last year potentially that you can grab those aids, we are aware that there are superintendents who are intentionally looking at reductions they might have to make in their own component budgets and thinking, how can I leverage BOCES to get shared services, still provide programs, opportunities, and purchases, and generate revenue? Because as you know, coming out of a pandemic, the chances of school districts to generate revenue through tax increases is going to be prohibitive. So we're cognizant of that. Charlie's doing a nice job of trying to pull back on the purple part of the pie and then offer options for districts to access some of those funds now in this year, which is not the norm, because we recognize they may need to, and also receive the other portion as a refund the following year. Other districts who have healthier fund balances, components may choose not to do that. They might say, you know what? I'm gonna go into some fund balance this year to cover up any gaps and keep teachers as long as I can. And then I'm gonna want that refund coming out a little on the larger side the following year, where I'm gonna need that in that year of 2021, 22, which is that significant year. Now, what's gonna have to happen is we're gonna have to really look at programming. So if you go, like if I go back here quick, this is where the bulk of cost is. Everyone knows that. So in school district budgets and BOCES budgets, it's people. That's what we do. We instruct and provide services. So it's people. And when you have to start looking at making changes beyond the purple slice, now you're impacting programs, which we're probably going to have to do. But what we can't do is just arbitrarily do that without the input of our school districts. We're a cooperative. So that's where we have to work hand in hand with them. Now, we're hoping that that's going to be happening this year. So we're going to look at how can we rebuild these programs in a different way that maybe is more financially viable and yet provides an appropriate level of service to children. Maybe there's some great innovative things we'll be doing, and maybe there'll be new services we'll be providing. We might be phasing some out and bringing some new ones in. But we need to work with components on that. We're not going to just do that to them. They might not appreciate that. And also, while we anticipate that being the planning for the 2021-22 school year, like the school districts, we have to recognize that the governor can change our financial landscape this year. So what we think might be the conversation for the planning of September, right? We actually could end up having to do some of this mid-year. And districts may have to do some of these things mid-year. So what's being proposed is an approval of the existing budget as it is, because our components are also doing the same thing. They're having to approve budgets that they're not quite sure really will represent the ultimate spending or the ultimate revenues that they're going to be able to take in. But if we approve this budget, we allow the components to still move forward with their planning and their budget approvals on time. And we may have to amend this budget. So depending on what ultimately happens through the course of this responsive year, we may have to come back with some amendments. I think in some areas we might see increases. In some certain itinerant places, we might see reductions, but in other itinerant services, we might see increases. As some components might have to look at phasing out a program, they might be calling us to see if we can create a shared program. So being able to predict where within the budget we might have to reduce or expand, we really can't do according to program lines, because as you know, the program budgets are flexible. But we are targeting the purple slice because that's the target we can hit now and work on now without impacting necessarily the people and the part of programming that's more fixed in nature in terms of service delivery. So we also just always try to point out that anytime we talk about doing this, we are talking about associated aid reductions, and that's why we work hand in hand with our components. But I do anticipate that, you know, if the financial landscape continues to be challenging, and of course, we're all assuming it will be, I do think it's probable that the governor is going to be able to contain the expense-driven aids at some point. And if they can get one more year of it, I think the superintendent should probably try to grab that. But after that year, it's probably going to go away. So if there's a time to do this, it probably is in time for this year, where it might not be available anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the share. That was a lot. But are there any questions?
Dr. Kilburn?
Yes, Dr. Porcelli.
I don't believe it directly connects, but indirectly it certainly does. I know in New York Mills, in their preparing their local budget, they have withdrawn from NYSBA and chosen as the cost-saving measure to go with rural schools. I believe Waterville was considering the same, and possibly Remsen. I don't know if that's impactful to what we're doing when Mr. Cowan was talking about budget considerations and services provided, if you wanted to comment.
Charlie, do you see a significant impact to our organization as a result of those decisions and or to our own organization with our own decision making?
I do not. I do agree with Dr. Porcelli that many school districts look at NYSBA, but I believe that, you know, that would obviously be the choice of the board, the cooperative board, that NYSBA is kind of critical to the development and continued education of our board. So I don't believe he's proposing that we eliminate it from our budget.
I was not, Mr. Cowan. I was just indicating that there may be a gap that exists in the local school districts and further services we may have to provide or you know, cover the difference. That's all. I don't recommend that BOCES withdraws at all.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Porcelli. Mr. Stewart, make sure you're unmuted, please.
Yes, to get back to that 46 million and the purple that we have
Yes.
basically no control on. I'm very interested in taking a look at all 12 component districts in their benefit packages and their wages and what each of those districts are doing as far, the blue, not the purple.
Right. So you're talking about the collective bargaining agreements?
Well, yeah, I want to know where the BOCES fit in. Are we in the middle? Are we on the high end? Are we on the low end? Because that can make a difference to that blue area.
It absolutely can. And if you'll note, I agree with you, Russ, and I put that in here as in that might be where the action takes place, but I agree with you that that's certainly an area that BOCES and the components are probably starting to look at this year.
Right. So, but I'm curious where we are in the 13 districts, including BOCES.
And you're looking at that across multiple lines, right? So you're not just looking at one collective bargaining agreement, you're looking at salaries and benefits across similar staff and types of staff between BOCES and the components.
Yes, thank you.
Yep, yep. So I'm trying to write that down and look at you and look at the slide. I know I'm not going to get it all. So I'm hoping that Deb and Charlie, you got that right.
Yes, yep.
Perfect. Okay. I'm gonna just-
Dr. Kilburn, I don't know how to raise your hand here, how to raise a hand.
Well, that works. Steve, how can I help you today?
Oh, well, just some comments and some concerns. As I listen to the whole budget, I'm mostly concerned with 21, 22. I think from listening to all the politicians and being on the county board and listening to the governor's press conferences all the time, I think this year people are going to patch things together and keep everybody whole. If I had to guess, I think the biggest real issues and big challenges are going to be 21, 22. And maybe BOCES can take the lead and start to have some real good, a consortium or some meetings with the district superintendents about what they can do to really be innovative. I mean, I hate to use the word regional schools. I think the governor is going to take advantage. He's not going to allow this opportunity of this crisis not to be able to take advantage of this. I think some of the things he's always been thinking about, he'll have an opportunity to try to push forward. And so you can either fight it or you can say, all right, what's coming our way and how do we get on the front end of this? Because I think if we go and lobby Albany all day long, I think he's going to acquire enough of the power and have enough opportunity here that he's going to be pushing forward some of his agendas that we've seen over the last years.
And like you, I think there's an opportunity in not only being able to innovate, but always to advocate for what's best for children, right? So think of some of the successes of remote learning, but we're also aware of some of the struggles with remote learning. So before we run out and allow someone to flip a switch for all of the state to go to online instruction, we could be innovating programs that maybe blend these things and yet really do right by children and by the professionals who serve them. I agree. And I think that's a great idea. And it's certainly something that's on our radar.
Right. Great. Thank you.
Welcome.
I could respond to some of Steve's comments. In this year's budget in Waterville, just under $900,000, I had a cut. From last year's budget to this next year's budget, 0.87% increase. So that we're already feeling the pain, and there were staff cuts in that.
Yep.
So that pain is already real. And I have to vent my frustration with the governor and the election money that I have to spend as a district, $20,000 extra that I don't have in my budget in order to send every resident, 5,000 of them in my community. I got to spend $1 in stamps for every one of them, not to mention the envelopes, the ballots, and everything else. So what simply could have been done, and I'm sure, Trish, you probably advocated for this already, is that we're a municipality by law. And every other municipality in the state of New York, their boards can vote on their budget. So it could have been a simple situation where this year, because of COVID, that we're going to treat school districts the same way that we treat every other municipality. And the board, if you stay within your tax levy limit, if the board approves it, then that's how it goes. No vote from the constituency. Simple way to assist districts. 20,000. And it is, we're not working together here. And I want to get back to your regional schools. It seems like we always have to wait for a crisis to think outside the box. Regional schools are the answer. And especially when BOCES gets capped. It may not get capped next year, it may not get capped the year after that, but in our terms in office, it will be capped. And you're going to start to see regionalization then.
Yeah.
I strongly suggest we don't waste any time and we start getting contiguous school districts to start to talk to one another and have BOCES be the center of that conversation, and we can distribute from from the BOCES. And Gary, a comment in regards to NISBA. I did talk to Bob and I did talk to Barry and Bill Miller that we are not participating in NISBA. I just, and nor, we took our superintendent's conference away and that organization's dues. We're trying to keep staff and it's hardship right now, guys. I'm not sure where the other districts are in regard to feeling the pain. But I had to approve a budget last night that you just want to cry over because you're cutting kids. You're cutting kids. And then I got to spend 20,000 on a vote. I got 3 board members running. I got 3 seats open. I don't need to do anything. Please leave me alone. But obviously that did not happen.
No. Any other questions about the budget, the conversation we've just had? Okay, go ahead, Elaine.
I have a couple of comments. First of all, I would like to say that we did talk about budget at our officers meeting, and Dr. Kilburn said that she was going to make a presentation to the board because she realized that there were some frustrations there. And I think the presentation that you and Charlie made was very comprehensive, looked at a lot of points, gave a lot of direction and things that could be done. I agree with Steve and Russ, however, and I think you would all agree that this is the year for the superintendents and you people as leaders to get together and be proactive and make some plans and not wait, because we're not going to get any better. We got to get ourselves out of the hole ourselves by whatever we do. And it's just, it is very frustrating, but the dollar is the dollar and it only is going to go so far. So I really would like to feel confident that there are going to be planned meetings during the year with agendas to discuss these kinds of things. And I would also like to suggest, I'm a little bit, I mean, I know a little bit about budgets and stuff, but there are a lot of things there that I don't want to take up time at board meetings. But if we could have a couple of tutorials during the year for board members who want to go, and we can get to some specific questions and some specific ways in which programs are designed, get a little more into the meat of it, I would appreciate it. And I think it would be helpful for other board members who are interested.
It's funny you say that. I would say there's some merit to tutorials on budgets, specifically because BOCES budgeting is not the same as component school district budgeting. Oftentimes as BOCES board members, you can encounter pressure from components to kind of do the same things that a component district does in the budgeting system, and it doesn't always work out that way. It's also challenging for superintendents sometimes to try to articulate the differences between BOCES budgeting and BOCES boards and how that works versus components. So for example, a component gets a threshold and they can spend up to, our program budgets are flexible and can keep responding to. It's a different mindset and paradigm. So I always think tutorials are a good idea. The more we become educated in how our system works and our finances work, the more we can advocate and make some great decisions. So Elaine, I think that's a good call.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any. So I am moving on. Let me go back to that shared screen. Okay, let me move ahead. Okay, staff recognition ceremony. So each year, the cooperative board hosts a staff recognition ceremony to honor retirees and people who have worked 15, 20, 30 years in our organization. And how do we go about doing that when we can't physically come together? So there are some good ideas, excuse me. We're going to hold a staff recognition ceremony on Tuesday, June 2nd at 4 p.m. And it's going to be virtual, kind of like this board meeting. And what we're going to ask is that the speakers, those who are presenting the awards and the board president, who usually will welcome, participate in the Zoom just like we as board members and administrators are doing so right now. And we will also hook up a live stream like we're doing right now via YouTube, so recipients and others can be watching us in real time. So right now, as I'm talking, there are people right now who are watching this meeting occur and will occur in the same way. We're going to recognize our retirees. I had a meeting about this earlier this week. Currently, we have 15 retirees, but we anticipate possibly more. It could be upwards of 20. And we want to also recognize years of service. So the letters, certificates, and clocks that we send out are going to be signed and mailed out in advance with an invitation to participate in this live virtual award ceremony, recognition ceremony. And we're also putting together like a PowerPoint and video that will be shared via Zoom, via this mechanism. That brings me to this, student ceremonies. We're going to take a similar approach for our student ceremonies to the greatest extent possible. And I'm going to kind of add a caveat to that in a minute. So our program leaders, so our principals of Career and Tech, P-Tech, MSA, and Bridges are working with school communications to think about how can we honor our children, especially when the governor has closed school till the end of the academic year. So we are looking at creating virtual ceremonies, some live Zoom ideas like we're doing now, others with pre-recording and video where viewers can watch. We're thinking about how can we hook it up to like Facebook so people can contribute and chime in from, so, if you want to celebrate your child, you can be like, that's my boy. We're looking at incorporating student pictures and videos and communicating with students and families in advance. And we're learning from across the state. People are doing this in a variety of different ways. And again, the acknowledgement certificates and things will be sent in advance. Now we're going forward with this planning, and we do understand that some interest is being expressed, and understandably so, in us holding a physical version. Like, is there a way to socially distance a commencement? I think in some populations it might be possible. We have programs that are smaller in nature, like Bridges, where that might be a doable thing. It's not a doable thing during the term of the academic year, because the governor has made that clear via the executive order. Is it possible that we can do something later, let's say in August, and with better local decision-making about the phases of reopening per the governor and public health guidance on that? Perhaps it is. So our program directors and principals are also planning for that. So for example, might there be an opportunity for some Bridges children to be acknowledged in like real physical life, right, versus virtual? So we're going to move forward with our virtual planning, but in some instances we are looking at like a physical backup or a supplement. And as we get closer to the dates, we'll learn more. And we'll keep you updated on that. I wish I could say that throughout our region we have the answer to this question. We don't. As a matter of fact, no one in the state does. But as the upstate areas are beginning to reopen, the glimmer of that possibility is there, and a lot of people are asking these questions. I feel sympathy for some of our component superintendents because there's a lot of pressure on them to make sure there's a physical graduation for children, and that may or may not even be possible. We do have some greater flexibility in that like our career and technical students, it's not a graduation. They're still experiencing what their school districts offer, and we do have smaller programs that might be appropriate. So we'll continue to keep you in the loop on that. So that stops that portion before we get to the last one. But before we go on, are there any questions about what I just discussed? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to move forward. And this is Ann Turner. So Ann Turner is going to share with us our regional curriculum initiative.
All right, Mr. Morris and I would like to spend a little time describing to you just one of the many ways we're helping to support our districts during this time of our schools being on pause. And this one, of course, is around remote learning, where districts are experiencing some challenges. So we're doing everything we can to support them there. This project is a joint project between Instructional Support Services and Program and Professional Development Division. We've entitled it, or I have, Less is More, and it is a challenge for our districts to fit the essential learning that students need into a compressed time frame. So the pause until the end of the year. So the team from Instructional Support Services and Program and Professional Development created an essential curriculum project with learning units for grades K through 2 in both ELA and math. And these units are prioritized. They are the essential New York State learning standards. And we created curriculum units for grades K through 2 presently from April to this June to assist the district. These units will be supported in the districts by high quality, focused teaching. I think that piece alone allows for flexibility on the part of the teacher, on the part of the district, and helps to soothe some of the uproar that has been caused by the governor's comments around reimagining education. We want to be sure that the teacher is the focus there and has flexibility to determine what is best for her class or his classroom, district, etc. So that's a very critical piece for us. These units that are created are supported by the use of technology, of course. And in this case, it would be the Buzz Learning Management System that you've heard much about over the years, and are built with learning resources that currently reside in Buzz. So this gives districts the opportunity to use these units in a variety of ways. So they may use them to complete instruction for the remainder of the year. They may utilize them to pre-teach for the fall or in the fall. They may utilize them in their special education classrooms or perhaps in classrooms that provide intervention services. These units were created. They have been presented to the superintendents. They seem to be pleased with what they saw. And at this point, we are progressing to build out an essential curriculum and the units for grades 3 through 8. And those will be ready in the fall. And before I ask if there are questions, I just want to say that the staff members from Mr. Morris's division and from my division did an incredible amount of work in a very short time frame to have this ready for the district. So all of the work and all of the accolades for this certainly go to them. So with that, Mr. Morris, is there something you would like to add?
The only thing I'd like to add is the content that was used to create these, we've had in-house for years, right? So when Common Core first came out, we spent a lot of money developing lessons, electronic lessons, worksheets, audiobooks, teacher presentations for that purpose back then. So what we've done is just we've repackaged them in a format that really provides an online course, right, that could be taught in school or out of school, right, for those teachers in K through 2, with the understanding that hopefully by the start of the school year, we'll have that K-8, right? So, I mean, whether or not schools are asking for it now, I think we're forecasting that need. And I think that need's going to come to fruition.
I would say that one of the dialogues that I've been having with component superintendents, and certainly we've been having internally, is that I think school is going to be, we've all talked about school kind of turn on and turn off, meaning that kids might come back and then there might be a second wave or a third wave of the virus and the kids have to go home again. But also within a given classroom, you might be a teacher who's teaching half your kids and the other half might be home. And that could be from social distancing, or it could be because of illness. Or you might be the teacher and you have to be home quarantined even though you feel well. So if we could get created a regional K-8 at this point curriculum, a teacher, a high quality teacher is really going to know how to use this tool. So for example, they could have the kids in the classroom and they could pull up those lessons and work interactive in the classroom environment using that as kind of a resource to pull from. But then if the kids can't come into school, they simply say, okay, you're going to go back online and now you're going to walk through it using the video tutorial components of it. And I'll zoom in and I'll call you to talk to you about specific components of that lesson where I think you need help. It's a really robust build. And that's why it was such a lot of work, because there are assessments built in that teachers can use to see how are the children responding and where do I have groups of kids who aren't kind of getting it and need help, and where do I have groups of kids who I can supplement because they're just high flying, like they're just getting it. It has videos, so a parent can get on and kind of watch a video on how a math problem should be solved. And thank God for that, because how many parents are going crazy at home right now trying to figure this out for every grade level, and they can't. But I think that emphasis on high quality teaching is the key, because what it's not intended to do is just turn on and let a kid watch their way through it and learn. It's really meant to be used as a tool. But I really truly believe that if we don't get something like this built, people are going to need it, and they're going to be scrambling, which is what happened now, right? So all of a sudden school was out in March and people were scrambling to make sure they had things in order. By getting to an essential curriculum that's regional, we're using regional teachers to help build it and regional teachers to help tweak it as it grows, which is very powerful and very different than when you're buying a product from a vendor or a corporation. So I think there's a lot here, and I'm hoping that components will continue to kind of come on board. And it's not going to happen overnight. You know, there's going to be some people who will come on board sooner than others. But I think if we don't get this built, we're just creating inequities from some schools who are able to provide certain kind of math instruction versus others who are scrambling for materials. So I think we're going to try to do our best here. And I'm very proud of the work that was done by both PPD and Instructional Support Services under Scott's division. Any other quick questions? Oh, notice I said quick. That wasn't very nice of me. Any other questions at all? They don't even have to be quick. Any slow questions?
I have one.
Yes, Michelle.
Okay, so first I tried to do the hand participation icon. Does that work?
Yeah, you know, I've never seen that before. Where'd you get that?
That is in our participations, you know, where it says participants and you click on that. And there's, you know, the yes, no's and the hand, raising the hand. So, yeah, so I wanted to see if that was working, and if I should use that when I do have a question, or do we just kind of jump in? But my question is, are any component districts currently accessing the K-2 program that you just explained, the less is more curriculum, or is this not live yet?
We just reviewed it all with them. I don't know what the takers are. Ann, do you?
Oh, okay.
Ann Turner? Who's talking with, but you're muted, Ann. Sorry. Still muted. There you go. Nope, muted again.
Here.
Now you're good. Nope, you just muted again. Okay. Don't touch the screen.
I'm trying not to. Yes, Michelle. The answer is yes. I've had conversations with a couple districts. They have called me with regard to their interest in utilizing it. So yes, I would say they are gearing up.
So what is the expense? Are we charging the districts for something like this?
Mr. Morris can certainly elaborate on this, but no, from now until the end of the school year, the answer to that is no. But Scott, do you want to talk about that going forward?
Yeah, so obviously the vendors that we deal with now have really stepped up to the plate and honored no cost increases, right, for additional licenses. Zoom being one of them, right? This is typically a $30 license fee. So Agilix, who is the partner company for Buzz, they're allowing us to add as many licenses as we want for the remainder of the school year, as is content vendors that we have partnerships with, right? That's going to change. I guess I don't know if it'll change, right? So I think if we continue into next school year in this scenario, I'd imagine vendor relationships are going to remain the same, right? They really want to get this content in the hands of students. So in this type of scenario, I would imagine it would be free. But what I've been told is if we do go back to a normal school day, right, there will be pricing based on associated licensing. So we have models, cost models built that we've disseminated with schools. They're aware of that. And hopefully, we can continue to work forward together.
Are we envisioning selling this like our science kits at some point, maybe?
Correct. It'll be a very similar model, right? So it's right now we're currently selling licenses to teachers, right? That model is going to flip to a student model at some point, right? So it would be a cost per student, depending on whether or not those vendors change their tones, right? So it could be that we could offer K-12 curriculum next year for free, right? By Lincoln Learning, a couple other vendors that have full-blown New York State online courses that can be modified by teachers to teach in a remote setting. So I think the timeline is going to change that direction, but currently that's where we stand.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, Doreen, you have a question? Go ahead and unmute.
I know more and more parents are going back to work. And this has been a question for my daughter who's teaching. They are starting to go back to work Monday and they're wondering, because usually the kids are in school and they do the teaching at school. So I think this is going to become more of a problem with more people going to work and this remote learning. Who's responsible? It's going to be tough.
Yeah, I think, when we look at that unpausing and all the different phases, right, of a full return, all that time in between, imagine that you're a parent who's trying to work and now your kids don't have a school to go to because they physically can't be together. Yeah, I do see that. And I think it's going to be a significant challenge. We're not out of the woods even close yet to that. Okay, so that concludes the lengthy but informative and hopefully entertaining district superintendent's report. Back to you, Elaine.
Okay, good enough. We will move right on with the approval of the minutes of the April 15th meeting. May I have a motion, please?
So moved, Michelle.
Okay. Second, please.
Second.
Yvonne.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed or abstaining? If not, it's approved. Approval of the consent agenda. I was going to pull the budget item to have some discussion, but we have had a lot of discussion on the budget item. So unless someone really wants to do that, I'll ask for a motion for the entire consent agenda.
So move.
You have a motion from Mr. Stewart. Second, please.
Second.
Mrs. Corbin. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed or abstaining? If not, approved as the motion was made. Now we'll move on to board topics. Our board topic is board officer elections. As you know, last month I postponed the discussion and appointment of a committee until today. I have appointed a board nominating committee. Michael Moore, Doreen Corbin, and Yvonne Irving have decided that, or have told me that they would go ahead and do this. Now, usually our procedure is that people declare if they are interested in a board position. I asked last month if people would contact me if they were interested. The position that we are in now is Mr. Boucher has decided that he will go on and be president or nominated as president, should the committee choose. We have 3 people who have expressed interest also in being a board officer, Dr. Porcelli, Mr. Stewart, and Mr. Nelson. Certainly anyone else who has an interest in that can contact any member of the committee. Sometimes people do not like to come out unless they talk to a committee person. We've also discussed in the past that there may be some people that the committee might consider who maybe don't want to put their name in. So certainly it is, the committee is able to explore and talk to other people about it. So the process is the committee will get together. I imagine they'll talk with the proposed candidates. I don't know, I'm not on it. And in June, by June, will let us know by mail. I believe that's what we do, or by email, what their slate will be. And then when we have our meeting in July, certainly there can be nominations from the floor for those positions. So that's where we sit with that. So we'll be hearing from the 3 people on the committee come June. Okay, now we have a motion for executive session, please, for the the employment history of a particular person. Is this yours first, Dr. Kilborn, or is it ours? This is only for the evaluation?
So you're only going to executive session to talk about me. So I'll be parting ways with you here and saying, be safe, stay well, stay sane, and enjoy your executive session. But Elaine, are you planning- I'm going to leave in just a minute. Are you planning on adjourning after executive session?
I believe we'll go out of executive session and we'll adjourn.
Okay.
Right.
So what'll happen is Mr. Morris is actually going to move all of you into a breakout room for your executive session, and have a good night. Oh, wait, did you get a vote?
Excuse me.
Oh, wait.
Michelle Anderson has a question.
Yep, there was no motion there.
Can I get an email copy of the presentation that you guys just presented to us?
Yep, I just made a note of it. I'm making like little pink notes, and I'm gonna get that out to all the board members. So you'll all have a copy of the PowerPoint.
Okay, very good.
Yep, and you need motions, right, Deb?
Yes, please.
Okay, we need a motion to go into executive session for personnel.
moved.
Second.
We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, we are in executive session.
All right, hold on just a second, Mrs. Falvo. I'm gonna try to move you all here. So you should see each other without the admin council here in just a second, okay?
Now, how do we get out? Just end the meeting?
So I believe there is a leave breakout room icon in the top
Okay.
right-hand corner.
Mhm.
So when you do leave and come back to the main session here, I do need to record the motion to adjourn. So if you could, Dr. Porcelli, is it possible for you to give me a call real quick, but when you leave in that breakout room?
After this discussion we're gonna have?
Yes,
Certainly I will.
thank you.
Mhm.
All right, here I go. I'm gonna try to move you.
Okay, so then we'll leave breakout room and it'll connect with you.
Yes, when you come out, that's when you're gonna make your motion to adjourn. So that's
Okay.
recorded.
All right, great.
All right, here I
Thank
go. Let me see what I can do here.
Scott, I'm calling you when the meeting is over. Am I correct?
Right.
When the executive session is ending, Gary. So when
Okay.
you come out of executive session, call him, so he'll
Yes.
remember to come over to the computer and record it.
Okay.
Thank you.
What am I doing here? And
Hang on, guys. It's gonna take a minute.
all right, let's see. So I want.
Join breakout room.
Well, hold on a second.
Yeah, they're going.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna work. So I think, Deb, did you see something?
I have joined breakout room
I hit later. Mine came up and I hit.
later.
Yep.
Okay.
So,
Yvonne and Michelle and Steve. Did you get something that says join breakout room?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I was,
Yeah, I thought you said, hold on a minute, though. Do you want us to go?
Yep, go. Off
All
you
right,
go.
I just wanna see how this is gonna work.
Yvonne, Could you see? Yep, she's, oh wait, Yvonne, are you still here? Do you see join breakout room? Click that. Oh, oh, we did it. Woo-hoo. Okay, so I have to leave the meeting, but I'm a host, and what I don't want to do is collapse your meeting.